I'm really excited about today's presentation. We haven't had a lot of mining representation, and I'm very curious to hear what Linda Caron has to say. She's got a master's of science, and she's a professional engineer with PN. I've seen that. My late husband is PH, so it's kind of Linda is a geological engineer with an honors degree in geological engineering from the University of British Columbia and a master's degree in geological sciences from the University of Calgary. She's worked in mineral exploration industry since 1980. In the late 1980s, she moved to the Boundary region to manage a large gold exploration project, fell in love with the area, and remained here when that project came to an end. She worked for a number of different companies over the years, and then in 1997, began work as a self-employed geological consultant for the exploration industry. Her experience has covered a range of deposit styles and geological settings in various jurisdictions in North America. She's worked extensively in the Boundary District, both in southern British Columbia and northern Washington, and is widely recognized for her knowledge of geology and mineral deposits in the area.
Hey.
Linda.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. And Christina asked me to talk about mining in the Boundary. And right away I said, what about mineral exploration? Because they're very, very different, but they tend to get lumped together under the term mining. So what I want to do before I talk about the Boundary, I want to just introduce mining and mineral exploration, give some background, because I think that'll clear up a lot of questions as we go through this. So if there are questions, if there's clarity things, if I say something and you're just not getting what I'm saying, please interrupt me. If they're more general questions, let's leave those to the end and we can have a discussion. So I'm just gonna... Okay. So first thing is the idea of mineral rights versus surface rights in BC and elsewhere in Canada. If you own the surface, you don't own the undersurface. The undersurface rights, the mineral rights are owned by the Crown. And they're granted to an individual or a company by way of mineral rights. So the landowner, the surface owner, owns from the bedrock surface up, all the dirt, the trees, and the mineral owner, the owner of that claim owns from the bedrock surface down. That's been the case since the 1890s. This is new, but it's an area of a lot of misunderstanding. And the mineral tenure owner has the right to access the surface of the land for exploration purposes. So there needs to be consultation. There can be compensation required. There's a permitting process to do that, but the surface landowner must allow that exploration activity to continue. So mining versus mineral exploration. Mining is that process of extracting minerals. So that could be a big open pit, could be an underground mine, whereas mineral exploration is looking for those minerals. So before the mining process happens, that might be just simply walking on the ground, taking samples from outcrop. It might be a drill program, or it might be one of these helicopter surveys. You've probably seen them going over, and those are measuring physical properties of the rock and using that, using those physical properties to try to see what's below the surface. So what am I not going to talk about? I'm not talking about oil and gas, and I'm not going to talk about placer mining. I'm talking about bedrock mining. So in the picture on the left, gold would occur in a vein. One way it could occur, like this, in the bedrock. And so you would come and you would mine that underground. But if that comes to surface, then it weathers, the gold can weather out of the rock, and it'll concentrate down in creeks. And that's called placer gold. That's like you would see, you know, panners or guys with sluice box, the Klondike Gold Rush. That was all placer mining. We're talking about bedrock mining. There are only certain streams in British Columbia where placer mining is allowed. And in this area, there's no commercial placer activity. So there are some claims that are held on certain streams, and they're very small, one and two person operations. Mining has a very negative image, and rightly so in many circumstances. The risk of major events happening is very low, but when they happen, they are catastrophic events. So this is a BC example, the Mount Holly tailings dam failure. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later. The other thing is really important to distinguish between historic mining and current mining. So, you know, rules and regulations have changed, and it's not valid to look at something that was mined 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, and apply those same standards to today. We have much better environmental standards, especially in BC. I think from an environmental point of view, you can make the argument that we should be mining in BC because we do it so much better than other jurisdictions in the world. And we have much higher reclamation standards. So this is not a BC example. This is just one I found, lovely example I found online. So there's an active mining operation on the left. On the right is what happened, what it looks like after it's been reclaimed. So all the buildings are gone, it's been replanted, and eventually you're not even going to know that there was a mine there. The idea that we're looking for hidden resource. So we can't see what's below the surface. And you know, here's an example, another vein example, and it comes to surface and then outcrop. Well, in this area, any deposit that came to surface has been found. There have been people walking these hills and looking at rocks for more than 100 years. So now we're looking for blind deposits. We're looking for these ore bodies that are sitting down here, and they don't come to surface. So we got to use other clues, things that we can see, or things that we can measure to give us an idea of where we're going to look for that. And you hear this a lot. This area has been explored before. You know, these guys, it must be a scam because there can't be anything there. We've already looked. But you know, technology is changing all the time, and we've got new tools to be looking for mines. So I'm going to start by talking about mining. There's a bunch of different types of mining. We tend to think mining means metal mining. Not always. That's where I'm going to start. So in BC, we mostly mine gold and copper. Now, not all deposits, if you find a deposit, it won't just be copper, or it won't just be gold. There will be silver with the gold, there might be gold with the copper. But those are the two commodities that we're mostly mining. And why? Well, you know, copper, both copper and gold have industrial uses. The average home has 400 pounds of copper in it. So we can't have the lifestyle we have today without minerals. Electric vehicles, we need copper. We need gold. It's used as a electroplating on contacts and conductors in electronics. So cell phones, computers, whatnot. Okay, how many active mines do you think there are in BC? Guesses?
2,000.
Active metal mines. How many?
2,000.
Okay, other guesses?
About 500.
I was gonna say 380.
Active metal mines in BC. 11. 11. 3 of them are gold.
It's like saying you just said mine, things that you're limited it down to active.
Active metal mines. We're not talking historic. So there are 11, 3 gold mines, 8 copper mines. 5 of those have been in operation for more than 30 years. So this picture, here's where they are, and you can see the Kettle River watershed down there. There aren't any in our area, active mines. There are 8 projects that are in the pipeline. They're going through environmental assessment, permitting. And that process takes 10-ish years. So this picture doesn't change very much from year to year. We might see 1 or 2 new mines added, 1 or 2 drop off, but it's pretty stable.
How come you didn't include coal mines?
It's coming.
Wonder my number.
Backing her up.
And just the economics of mining. So it's really a grade versus tonnage thing. You can have a very large, very low grade mine, and that's economic, or you can have a very small, high grade mine, and that would be equally economic. So some of these mines are very small, and some of them are enormous. How many past producing mines in BC?
A lot.
Yeah, a lot more. About 1,500. And so really important to know whether we're talking active or historic when we're talking mining. And look at our area down there. It's just black with mines. Now, many of these were just pick and shovel, 1 or 2 person operations. But what they are is an indication of mineral potential. So this is a very mineralized area. It cuts off at the border. That's because I use BC data here. The mineral potential continues on to the south, and I'll talk about some Washington examples a little later. So, okay, we found an ore body. Now we've got to get the mineral out. And when you find an ore body, it's not solid gold, it's not solid copper. You get minerals in rock, and you have to liberate that mineral from the rock. So one way you can do that is by milling. There's a BC example of a mill. That's the New Afton mine. You've probably driven past it. If you've driven from Kamloops to Cache Creek, you go right past this, and it looks like an industrial complex. It's hard to recognize it as a mine. But what you're doing is you're crushing the rock, and then you're using various methods to separate those minerals from the rock that it's in. And that might be magnetic. If the mineral you're looking for is a magnetic mineral, then you can pull it out on the basis of that. It might be gravity. Gold is heavier than most other minerals, so you can crush it and use gravity as a way to separate the gold, or you can use chemicals, and very commonly that is done. These are water-intensive processes, milling. So they recycle the water. When you mill, you get 2 things. You get a mineral concentrate. You're not getting solid metal, you're getting a concentrate, and you're getting tailings. So what are tailings? Tailings are that finely ground rock that's left over when you've taken the metal out, the mineral out. And you're storing them in tailings ponds like that one. That's the Copper Mountain Tailings Pond at Princeton. So the tailings themselves, they're rock. They're not necessarily harmful. They might be. They might be acid producing. They might have metals in them that are deleterious. But the real danger is the potential for dam failure there, because you're holding this slurry of sand basically in water back behind a dam.
Hey, Linda, I don't mean a dumb question, but every time I drive by that, I used to do a lot of work over there as forestry. What are the chances of that thing failing?
There's a dam failure. So this is Mount Polly, and this was the tailings pond here, and catastrophically let go because of poor engineering of subsurface materials. The dam was okay, but it was the materials underneath that hadn't been properly categorized. It let go, and all of that material flowed down into this Table Pine Creek up here, and then out into Quesnel Lake.
So yeah, it's a Quesnel area.
Major catastrophe. So I'm going to talk a bit more about tailings ponds. Stay with me. Well, if we still have that question at the end. Okay, so the other way to liberate minerals, we talked about milling, which produces tailings. The other way is smelting. Smelting produces slag. So those 2 terms are used incorrectly a lot of times. Slag is that black glassy material. We know it here at Greenwood, in Grand Forks. It's inert, it's glass. Those metals will not leach out of slag. But the process of making slag is nasty. So you need a smelter. There are 2 smelters in BC. One's in Trail, one's in Kitimat. Trail is a lead zinc smelter. Kitimat's aluminum. You cannot take copper ore and send it to the Trail smelter. It's not the right process to recover the copper. So actually our copper concentrate from BC mines mostly goes to Japan. Smelters, there aren't many around the world, and they're very metal specific. That's the old Granby smelter. And you know, we've lost trees around Trail. We've lost them around Greenwood, around Grand Forks, because of the acid from the smelting. So not a great process, but it is what you need to do once you have a metal concentrate from milling. You got to send it to a smelter. It's the only way to get the metal out. Okay, coal mining. So I talked about mining different types. We tend to think that it's all metal mining, but coal mining, we mine coal in BC. We don't mine thermal coal. And what I mean by thermal coal is coal that we burn to generate electricity. So that, again, not a great process environmentally. We don't mine thermal coal. What we do mine is metallurgical coal. And you cannot make steel without metallurgical coal. And the reason is because you need those carbon atoms from the coal sit in between the iron atoms. And it makes the difference between brittle iron, cast iron, and steel, which is very strong. So you have to have coal for that process. How many coal mines in BC? 20. 7. Oh, they're all big operations. They're all open pit. These are water intensive operations.
There's 7 down the other.
No. Well, they lump them, you know.
Oh,
so that
I separated them.
And they all occur in a belt of rock. So we don't have the right geology here for this type of mine. I'm sure most of you know there are big environmental issues in the Elk Valley from selenium contamination, and there's ongoing reclamation there.
Not just a local thing here, is I happen to have the coal mineral rights underneath the ground.
Yeah.
Talking about that.
Well, so
On my property, and there was a little coal mine just across from this, from
For-
Midway Sawmill.
for thermal coal, yes,
Yeah.
that we have some small occurrences of thermal
Yeah.
coal. Okay, aggregate. This is mining. It is regulated under the Mines Act. So that might be, you know, sand and gravel, digging it up with a loader and screening it. It might be crushing rock that's used as road base. Generally, these things don't use any water, maybe just a little bit for dust control. But they have to be permitted, even if you're the surface land owner and you own that sand and gravel, you cannot start mining it without a permit from the Department of Mines, the Ministry of Mines. And there's over 1,000 active aggregate producers.
Does
in
that
BC.
include the private fish we have around here?
Yes, it does. They're all permitted. Or they should be. And so the fourth type of mining is industrial mineral mining. And that might be mining limestone, which is used to make cement. Could be gypsum, which is used to make wallboard, drywall, or lots of other things we mine in BC. So there's 30 of these, and what those operations look like is highly variable. It really depends on the commodity. Okay, now I'm going to switch and talk mineral exploration. So it's important to sort of understand what that exploration cycle looks like. So it really starts over on the left. Somebody stakes a claim, prospector, and then it takes some money to explore it. So they'll rent it. We call it optioning in the exploration industry. They'll rent it to a company, and that's a company. It's usually a junior exploration company. They raise their money on the stock market. They don't have active mines. They're not generating income, so they need to raise money. They raise it on the stock market, and then they spend that on exploration. So that goes along for however long it goes. They keep making the rent payments. And then one of 3 things can happen. Either they get poor results and they say, okay, we're done, and the prospector gets his claim back, and usually it will lapse. They get good results, but they can't raise any more money because, you know, there's a global economic crisis, metal prices have dropped, something that their shareholders are no longer willing to give them money. Or they get good results and then they move it on to another company. So those companies, the small companies that are doing exploration, they don't have the expertise to be miners. That's a totally different skill set, totally different mining set of companies doing that. So they'll sell it on to one of these mining companies. That mining company will do advanced exploration, and until they've proven up an ore body. And that's probably another 5 years. So, you know, it might have taken 20 years in the first cycle of people exploring. Now, once it's in a big company, it's going to take them another 5 years to do enough drilling to prove that they've got something viable. Once they think they've got something viable, then it moves into the permitting process. So that's the Environmental Assessment Act. It's community consultation, and that's probably at least a 10-year process. And then mining can start. So this is just a little case study. The Eskay Creek deposit in northwestern BC. It operated in the 90s, early 2000s, and at that time, it was the highest grade gold mine in the world. It was the 4th largest silver producer in the world. Had a really small footprint, right? Just a tunnel going in. It was a fly-in operation. They actually produced their concentrate on site and flew the concentrate out. I don't know, there is no other operation in BC that has done that, and I don't know of very many other ones, but it was so high grade they could do that. But here's the interesting part. It was first staked in 1932, took 19 different companies 56 years to discover it. And the discovery drill hole, the one that said this is a mine, was the 109th drill hole. So that was mined out, but now people have been exploring there since, and it looks like it'll reopen. It looks like they've found enough to reopen it. So the takeaway here, mines are really elusive. We're trying to find something, we can't see it. We're using all these clues to look for it, but it takes a long time. And the stats are about one project in 10,000 will become a mine. Okay, so now mineral exploration. Basically two types: early stage exploration, which is stuff that's low risk, low water use, low impact on the land. It might be, walking along, taking samples of soil, which we're analyzing for metal content. I could be doing a geophysical survey, measuring properties of the rock. It can take a long time in this early stage, 20, 30 years, not uncommon. The SP Creek scenario, that's 50 something years it took. And technology is changing all the time. So, we have new, for instance, in these airborne surveys, that has really changed in the last 10 or 20 years, the types of things that we're able to measure from airborne without even setting foot on the land. And then advanced exploration. These are higher risk activities. This is the Blackwater deposit in BC. This is one of the ones that's in the permanent stage right now. And so what they've done, they want to do systematic grid space drilling. So they have clear cut that area where the gold deposit sits. And then they're going along and drilling probably on a 25-meter spacing. And some advanced exploration might be underground. People will drive in because it's getting too deep to drill from the surface. So they'll go underground and drill from there, just because it's more efficient. And this is where you're going to start to see baseline studies, environmental baseline studies, and permitting and consultation. Okay, so now that was kind of just the background about mining and exploration, moving it closer to home. In the Kettle River watershed, there are no active metal mines. There are no active coal mines. There are 2 industrial mineral mines. One of those is Rock Gold, has a quarry up by Phoenix. They're mining diorite, which is basically a granitic rock. They're not mining it for metal content. They're mining it, and then in the plant, it is melted down and spun out into a rock fiber. For insulation purposes. It's really, really an interesting process, and they make just a fantastic property. And I don't think we in the Boundary recognize just how amazing this is. I could do a whole talk on this alone. It is such a good process, produces such a good product.
How many of those mines are out there in BC that pulling in this mineral?
0. What?
This is the only one.
This is
Okay.
it. Yeah. This
They
is
have
it.
the Midas touching.
Yeah. Where am I? Oh, oops. All right. Okay, another industrial mineral mine, also close to Grand Forks, is Pacific Abrasives. They're mining the historic slag from the Phoenix mine, and they're doing 2 things with it. They're making an abrasive for sandblasting. And they're making granules for asphalt shingles, roofing granules, that growing on shingles. Now, I don't know how well you can see this picture. It's just a Google Earth image, and this is the flag sits in here. What they have, though, is a tailings pond sitting on the slag. So remember, 2 different types of byproduct. They're using water at this operation in a hydrosizer. So to help size the particles for the different purposes. And so they're discharging, here's the tailings pond. They discharge into this side. You can just sort of see a little discoloration there. That's because the slurry of fine slag is going into the water. And then they're pulling water back from this side. Once a year, they let the pond dry out and they scoop out that fine material and it's waste. But that's being held back by this earthen dam. And here's the Grand River. So tailings ponds are a risk. Tailings ponds next to bodies of water are a risk. And now there are regulations in place that say that every dam must have a dam safety inspection annually. And just really important, this is not the only example in our area of tailings pond. Really important that all of the companies are being made to adhere to the regulations that are in place. Okay, aggregate mines, we've got lots of them. So that sand, gravel, crushed rock. These are often intermittent operations. So they'll screen a bunch of material. It might be owned by highways, and that's sand that's going on the roads, or it might be something that's privately owned. And as I said before, so even if it's your own land, you must have a permit to start a gravel pit. Okay, now exploration, what's happening in the boundary. There are no advanced exploration projects, so no projects that are close to being a mine. There are lots of early stage exploration projects. And as I said before, those outcropping deposits, they've been found. So now we're looking for these things that are, we call them blind, they don't have a surface expression, they're harder to find. There's the Phoenix mine, both, historically and what it looks like now. Different geologic settings are prospective for different minerals, and in our area, we're most prospective for copper and gold. The Phoenix mine is always known as a copper mine. But actually, if you look at the value of the ore that came out, it's a gold mine. So there was over 1 million ounces of gold produced from Phoenix, and that's kind of, when companies are looking for potential, that's sort of the number you want. You want to see 500,000 to 1 million ounces, or it's not worth going through the process of turning it into a mine. You can't cover your capital costs for building a mill and everything else that's required. Okay, now moving south of the border in the Republic, Curlew, Chisaw area, this was a historic mining district. So there was over 3 million ounces of gold produced at Republic. But in the last, 40 years-ish, 7 new mines have been found across the line, compared to 0 on our side. And another 2.5 million ounces of gold. Now, those are all mined out. This one, so there's the Buckhorn mine. There was a lot of controversy when this went in. But this is what it looked like. This was in the active mining stage. It's an underground mine, and it's closed now. So this gets reclaimed, and it's just going to be a hillside, which will eventually be forested again. They have done a fantastic job of reclamation at some of these mines. If you drive south towards Republic, when you go past Curlew State Park on your right, if you look left, that's the mine. And it's just a nice grassy hillside now. So there are some really lovely examples. There's some horrible examples of reclamation out there, but there are some really good ones. One of the things that made this work is that they had a central mill, and they processed from all these 7 different mines. All of the ore went to one place. So it allows you to have a much smaller footprint at the actual mine site.
While you're on that topic,
Yeah.
how much did the mine put into the reclamation? In other words, hey, north of Okanagan, Watershed landscape, but a lot of work there planted. They have got beavers up in Lyre Creek now, up with and everything. So what was the proportion of the mine, and did you know?
I know the mine is 100% responsible for the reclamation.
Okay.
So anything that's being done by other groups is a bonus. And they're ongoing. Kinross has a presence for ongoing monitoring reclamation in the area. Yeah.
Always nice to see that done afterwards. So it was nice.
Yeah. Okay, so at early stage exploration projects in our area, there are lots. Most of them are gold, people looking for gold, and mostly people are looking for these high grade underground, smaller deposits. There's Grand Forks, Rock Creek would be here. These are mineral claims. It's 100% staked. That's about 70 kilometers here, and maybe 35, 40 kilometers north to south. 100% staked by mineral claims.
Is there also a map that shows where every one of the exploration sites?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so that one I had that showed all those little buckets, those are past producers, but even there are prospects that you can pull up. It's called MinFile and you can download that. I can send you that. So who are they? Well, there's a group of 3 companies, Exxon, Golden Dawn, and GGX. They're all kind of common management. They are one of the 2 largest tenure holders in the area. They bought out Kettle River Resources, so they own the Phoenix Mine, Origin Oro. They also bought Merit Mining's operation, so that there is a mill that's on care and maintenance up by Phoenix. So this company owns that, and they've been exploring in the area for a couple of years, doing airborne surveys and some drilling. They haven't really had, but I don't think that they're any closer to having a mine than they were when they started. Another one of the major mineral holders in the area is Grizzly Discoveries. They haven't been active for a couple of years, but most of the work they've done has been over in that Rock Creek Bridesville area. KG Exploration, this is Kinross Gold. It's a subsidiary of Kinross, who was the one mining south of us. They're trying to find ore to feed their mill at Republic. And they optioned Grizzly's land for a couple of years, and they explored up on our side. They've since given that back, but they do have a smaller land holding up the North Fork. And they had some really good drill results a couple of years back, but they haven't really been active for maybe 2 years now. Another company is Belmont Resources. They've got 4 different properties in the area. 2 of them are just northwest of Grand Forks, one on each side of the highway. One up the North Fork, about 20 kilometers up the North Fork, and then one actually just across the border in Washington, the Lone Star. And they've done some drilling and some geophysical surveys. Again, not really, they haven't had the discovery hole yet. 2 more companies, Troubadour Resources is working up near Beaverdale, near the old Highland Bell mine. And I keep talking about drilling, and I should probably put this picture in sooner, but that's what drill core looks like. So when you have a drill rig out, you're bringing back a continuous core of rock, and that gets laid out in these boxes, and you read it like a book. And so that geologist is there going through centimeter by centimeter, describing what they see, taking samples, sending them away for analysis. And then Gold Cliff Resources has a new discovery at Christian Valley. They haven't done any drilling yet, but this is a brand new outcropping discovery. It's not, the grade are not mine grade yet, but it's interesting, and it'll be one to watch. So I'm just about done, but want to touch on climate change and how it's affecting the mining and exploration industries. So one of the things is a shifting demand for metals, and particularly rare earth elements. So those are used to manufacture permanent magnets, which we need in modern electronics, in electric vehicles, in wind turbines. China controls the global market for rare earth elements. They, not just in mining, but in processing. It's quite a difficult process of extracting these rare earth elements from the rock that they're in. We do have some deposits in Canada, and we may get there where we're mining them, but we're not yet. The other thing that we're seeing a change in is a change to green energy. And that's changing the demand for things like graphite and lithium and cobalt. And so this World Bank study says we're going to see a 500% increase in the demand for those metals by 2050. And that's why do we need mining? Well, that's it. We can't have green energy without producing these minerals. We're also seeing, and this is really a good thing, we're seeing a move to green energy solutions for remote mine sites. So typically a remote mine you'd power with a diesel generator. Now we're seeing hydro transmission lines come in so that we can use hydroelectric power, or in Africa, they have big solar farms, in other places, wind turbines being used. So all good things. What about closer to home? I would say monitoring for extreme weather events is something that we really need to be doing. And here's another example of tailings pond. This one is one of the old Phoenix tailings. As you're driving up to the ski hill from the Grand Forks side, it's at about 3 kilometers. You're going around a switch bank, and just to your left is the Phoenix tailings. So these have been sitting there since the 50s, but they're still saturated. And the reason is because there's this creek coming in. So this is still a slurry of sand and water being held back by this dam. And the dam is actually made of slightly coarser tailings material. So if we have an extreme weather event, I would say there is potential for dam. Well, in any dam, there's potential for failure. I don't see this one as a particularly high risk, but it's something we need to be monitoring. We need to be aware of.
Is that monitored by provincial authorities?
No, the government or the company that owns it, so in this case, that would be Golden Dawn, is responsible for doing a dam safety inspection once a year, and then there's another acronym. Once every so many years, they have to do another kind of study, and those are submitted to the government. The question is, does the government always make sure those are being done?
Good question, yeah.
And if they're not, what happens?
And how well does the government monitor the results that are
Yes,
supposed to be reported
indeed,
to the reader?
indeed.
I'm gonna move this question over to the very end.
Yeah.
Just
Okay,
it's
that's
very
very
close.
yeah. I think I only have 2 slides left. Okay, there were 2 tailings dams at Phoenix. The other one is on the Greenwood side, on the Twin Creek side. So as you leave Phoenix, heading towards Greenwood, and you're going down the switch banks, look left, and you'll see a big rock dam. This actually failed in '69, and that tailings came running down the Twin Creek Valley and down past the post office and right across the highway. And this is interesting. Okay, so there was a high spring runoff, high water event that caused some damage. The actual failure didn't happen until September 12th. So there's a real lag time between the trigger and the event. And 10 million gallons of water and tailings spilled in about 5 hours. So big potential, low risk, but huge potential for problem. So just other things, yeah. Climate change, I would say invasive species is a big one that we need to be doing a better job of in the exploration industry. And so whether that looks like washing vehicles as they're leaving the highway before we're going into some of these sites, prolonged fire season. So maybe there's a shorter period where we should be out there in the bush working, protection of critical habitat, all of these things. I threw this in because it's always a question. Uranium in BC, we don't mine uranium, we don't process it, we don't explore for it, but there are known deposits, and they're down in our area. I know, in the 70s, absolutely.
Well, again, not long ago.
Well, they started the exploration.
So the moratorium came off, and companies came back in, and they're very low grade deposits, and they don't compete with what Saskatchewan has, for example. I don't think that they're ever going to be economically viable. I don't think they pose a risk from the point of view of mining them. But what they do pose a risk, they're there. The mineral is there in the ground. And we need to be darn sure that, for instance, if we're cutting a bank to put a new logging road in, we better be aware of where these deposits are so that we're not disturbing that ground.
Years ago, I had a guy drilled 2 big holes in my place looking for uranium.
Yes.
Pretty
Yes.
scary.
Okay, and then arsenic versus cyanide. So people without a background in chemistry often get these mixed. They're both nasty. Arsenic is naturally occurring, often with gold. So the two come together. It's not something that is added during the mining process. It's something that can already be there. So is there arsenic in this area? Yes, there is. Could it be a concern? Yes, it could be. And what do? Well, we ought to be testing the water. Cyanide, on the other hand, is something that's used during the mineral processing process. It can't, not always, it's particularly used to extract gold. It's highly toxic, and if you get a cyanide spill, you'll kill aquatic life. It does break down very, very quickly in sunlight. So in the long term, not an issue. Yeah, Barb?
Historical plastic mining, you use mercury into a lot of systems, like what's the current level of mercury in our water system, do you know, or, or use within the mining industry that currently?
Use within the mining industry is 0. I don't know what the
I know
historical.
I found it in Rock Creek before.
Yes, I'm
Walking
sure.
there, and there's like
Little
mercury
blobs. Yeah,
still in the creek bed.
Yeah.
From when they mined the plastic mining.
Yeah.
So that's something else that, I mean, mercury is obviously a really big issue in Okanagan and throughout the whole Columbia system, where the levels are so high. I was telling people they were shocked by, you know, you should not eat a fish over 30 centimeters out of any of these systems more than once a month. Because of mercury.
Wow.
levels. So anyway, it's a comment, mercury is something else.
yeah,
And it's already there from.
Good point. Yeah.
Money.
yeah, it is. So just back to cyanide, the mill that exists up by Phoenix is not a cyanide mill. They don't use cyanide in the process. So if it ever starts up again, that's not something we need to worry about. But there are historic operations in this area that use cyanide. I would say they're no longer a concern because the cyanide does break down so rapidly. Last slide. Footprint of mining. So there's the province of BC. The little province in the middle, that's the area that would be staked by current tenure. This is a little bit old, this slide is a bit dated, but it doesn't change that much. So, and then that black dot would be the total area disturbed by all mining, current and historic. So it's a small footprint,
It could be bigger.
but it can have big effects. And that's all I got. So I don't know how we're doing for time, but welcome. Any questions?
Yeah.